An unusual figure with 2 arms and 2 legs stood silently in the darkness. If only for a moment, its beauty, which was even apparent from afar, dulled the insanity of the current situation. Oh boy! Extend, extend, extend! The utterly unknown threat made Aoko freeze on the spot. Avoiding it didn't even occur to her. Humans possess intelligence and knowledge, but when confronted with the unknown, they fail to process what to do and... A shriek escaped Aoko's mouth. The magical attack crossed the 30-foot gap in an instant. The arm of the girl who had appeared at the rear of the corridor was slender and quick. It extended to a near impossible length, striking Aoko from behind. Aoko crashed into the wall and she fought back, an anguished whimper. The attacker retracted her arm. Sojiro sprang to his feet. He darted to her side and used all the strength he could muster to get her to her feet. He could not believe how light she was. In Sojiro's mind, Aoko was an extraordinary individual. He'd expected that if he were to ever touch her, it would be apparent she was far stronger than he. But in reality, she felt about as heavy as you would expect a 100-pound girl to feel. Meanwhile, that thing continued to reel its arm as if it were some sort of mechanism. Having extended more than 30 feet from the elbow joint, it clanged as it returned to its previous shape and size. Aoko tore her hand away from Sojiro's. Suddenly she felt her knees buckle from under her, but Sojiro caught her before she could hit the ground and helped her to her feet. Nein. He looked back at the eerie shadow 30 feet away as it finished retracting its arm. Ja, aber tja, offensichtlich ist nicht dasselbe. Aoko grabbed her lower back as she answered. A searing pain shot through her. Aoko tried to steady her breathing as she assesses the damage done to her back. The pain was quick to fade and her breathing returned to normal. For the time being, her motor functions were no longer hindered, which meant the real damage was elsewhere. Blue light glowed across the gloom. The magical energy generated by her breathing was accumulating in her right arm. If magical energy was the fuel, the formula was the igniter. For Aoko, this was little more than a reenactment of 2 evenings ago. Next time the puppet extended its arm, Aoko would fire a magic bullet as fast as she could. A battle at approximately 30 feet. As long as Aoko could secure a 2-second window, she could create a counterattack to end the duel. It made its move. With its head tilted down, there was no expression to be seen. And in the darkness, its apparent age was impossible to make out. To the two humans, the puppet was not dissimilar to a faceless ghost. Its left arm slowly came up with a grinding sound. Its movements were dull, as if the joints were rusty. The right arm, which had been extended earlier, hung at its side. Though the puppet's mouth was hidden by its long locks, the sense was that it was smiling.
さっきと用途が違う。あれが本命。しずきくん、どいて。
She threw herself into Soshiro's and extended her hand. Its arm extended at that very moment. The timing was impeccable. In a single second, Aoko's magic bullet scored a direct hit on the puppet's arm, reversing its trajectory and sending it crashing into the puppet's body with a violent explosion. Or at least, that is what would have happened had the magic formula been invoked. Oh. She barely avoided being struck once again. When her magecraft failed her, intuition took over and she just managed to get away.
やられた。最初のはそういうことか。
She clenched her teeth in frustration, her thoughts racing a mile a minute. Fight or flight. It only had one arm left, which would take time to retract. This was the best shot Aoko had at defeating it. If she could evade the right arm just a fraction, she could get close enough to...
Vivo insomni, solitae reputeris inferis. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies, Theobeam.
Oh God, Latein. In slumber I live, in dirt I rot alone. Today is the day I died and was born. I come to you. A crackle echoed through the corridor. The poetic murmurs contained enough magical energy for a mage to perceive. The verse itself was Latin, but it contained hints of the language of curses, Ganda. Originally, they were words meant to curse a hated adversary. However,
Mea animae mortalis, otem eftura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est. Theodi et am, conveniamus insomnio ipse.
my life is immortal, though my future was destroyed. I am a ghost, the definition of life is ethereal. I hate you, I love you, let us meet in a dream. The puppet was directing the words at itself. Curses beget curses, the victim calls down a curse, eating a vicious cycle of negativity. The incantation was meant to do just that. However, this was ultimately a one-puppet show. An unprecedented source of power akin to auto-intoxication. As unbelievable as it seemed, the cycle of curses had been turned into a perpetual motion device.
何それ、レベル高すぎじゃない。
Aoko abandoned the idea of digging her heels in. It was time to flee with all due haste.
何してんの、あんたも来る。
She grabbed Sochiro's hand and ran as fast as she could, deeper into the realm of mirrors. The crackling voice continued its murmuring behind them.
Proximi mich negligentes ferunt, omnes nos peccantes fims, et omnes nos edem fims, omnes nos peccatores sums. Venit domum meum, lut simile somnium, et pulvere simile quotidianum, corporebo.
My neighbors neglected me, not an innocent among us. We are all sinners. We are all sinners. Welcome to my house. May we die a muddy death, from dust to dust. Gouge out my heart.
Te judico.
Te judico. Death. Ah. Die haben es ausgetauscht. Death be upon you. Aoko fought against the pain in her back as she ran through the mirrored corridor. She dragged Soichiro by the hand.
青崎、傷は？
別に背骨がしびれてる程度よ。内臓は平気だし、出血もないみたい。
She cursed inwardly at how much of a mess she felt, though. Unlike Soichiro, Aoko did not run into any transparent walls. Thanks not to superior sight, but rather preparation, she hammered the layout of the building into her memory.
平気ってわかるのか？
そりゃ自分の体だもの。身体管理は基礎中の基礎よ。
Aoko's matter-of-fact answer contrasted with Soichiro's nervous questioning. The corridor grew shorter with each and every left turn. At first they were able to advance in a straight line for about 100 feet at a time. But by now they were forced to turn a corner every 50 feet or so.
あいつはあの夜の？
多分ね。同じタイプだと思う。貴重なオートマタを惜しげもなく使い捨てるなんて、よっぽどお金持ちなんだろうけど。
Automata, huh? Soichiro furrowed his brows. He was grateful that she was answering his questions, but baffled by the strange words she was using.
青崎ストップ。もう随分走ったぞ。あいつは曲がり角一つ分向こうだ。少し休もう。
His words suggested that he was still concerned about the injuries. Aoko shook her head in irritation.
あの距離を狙ってくる相手に通路一つ分のリードは無意味よ。せめて二つ分に行くまで走るの。
Soichiro nodded. With that matter settled, he asked,
なんで俺を連れて行ってるんだ？
いや、wieso?
逃げられたくないからじゃない、バカ。
Answering curtly, Aoko glared at her naive prey. The two of them headed for the next corner. Their legs began to slow as they rounded one more. Aoko rubbed her back as she tried to catch her breath. Though Aoko had insisted that she was fine, it appeared to have been bravado. Even the usual clueless Soichiro felt the desperation they were in. He stood behind Aoko with his arms folded. While they had a moment, he tried to make sense of everything. First, Aoko had nearly killed him. Though he was saved at the last possible second, it was by the strange, stretchy woman Aoko had burned to ashes 2 nights prior. He could barely make it out that night, but he considered it a her because it looked female. The woman's attack wounded Aoko's back and forced her to flee. Aoko had taken Soichiro with her, claiming that the reason she did so was to prevent her prey from escaping. In other words,
青崎はまだ諦めてないんだな。
yeah.
当たり前よ。あんなやつ、仮に2体と半分始末しても、あんた用の余力は残せるわ。
Her tongue was sharp, but even Soichiro could see that she was struggling to stay confident. The damage to her body was too much to afford her any optimism. Still, the fury in her eyes refused to accept her circumstances.
中がところどころショートしてる。あの右腕は回路を混戦させるジャミングってわけね。
Though the proper response would have been for her to tremble in fear, she did nothing but shake her fists in anger. The disruption of formulae was only supposed to work on absolute beginners. If it had been her roommate, the arm would have been repelled the instant it hit her, and the attacker's circuit burned out rather than her own. Attempting to establish a link to the magic circuits of another mage was like presenting your heart on a silver platter. It would be of no use in a battle against a superior mage. And yet her adversary had been designed to do just that. Coupled with the attacks on areas of Misaki under Aoko's jurisdiction these last few weeks, it was a clear statement from the enemy, who as of 2 days ago had revealed itself as a fellow mage. In other words, the puppet saw Aoko as no threat at all.
敵ながら正確な判断だこと。
While she was still angry, the whirlwind of emotions within her started to fade. Her face was that of a hunter far beyond her years.
なんか俺の時より真剣だな。
まあね、あんたの時は遊びが入ってたし。
Soichiro was not sure whether to be happy or sad about that.
わからないことだらけで何を聞いていいかわからないんだけど、一つだけいいか。
Aoko didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the darkness before them. The silence was heavy, and the darkness was like a noose closing in on them. But Soichiro continued in spite of her indifference.
青崎はあいつも殺すのか。
A silence fell over them. It was as if the gloom was pulling them in. No response. Their breathing was the only sound echoing in the dim corridor. There stood Soichiro, forcing her to confront her sins, and a magician girl who continued to ignore him. They spent a few seconds seemingly frozen in time.
そう。それがあなたのキーワードみたいね。
Aoko whispered in a lifeless tongue. Her sigh was tinged with both resignation and contempt.
何？
独り言よ、忘れて。それと、言っとくけど、あいつは人間じゃないわ。信じられないだろうけど、自分の意志で動く人形なの。この前のも、今のやつもね。
Soichiro nodded as he processed the information. Not only did he not doubt her story, but he seemed to have accepted it at face value.
なんか落ち着いてるわね、あなた。
まさかもう何が何だかわからないからあまり考えないことにしてるだけだ。ただ人形に関しては別にどうということはない。
Ich meine, bei den Armen?
もしかして他でも自動人形を見たことあるとか？
都会の人形ってああいうものじゃないのか？
え？She barely stopped herself from falling to her knees. Of course! How could she have forgotten? She was dealing with a bona fide natural-born moron. As a student who transferred from the isolation of the mountains like an endangered species, his utter lack of common sense rendered anything miraculous as mundane. If automobiles were moving hunks of metal, then moving puppets were nothing to write home about. Wait, that meant... To him the incident from the other night hadn't been extraordinary at all. He might have even assumed it was an everyday occurrence in this city.
参った。いっぺん頭の中覗いてみたいっていうか、ほんと、ここまで来ると感心するわ。調子が狂うのも当然だった。普通は私に襲われた時点でもっと違う反応をするはずなのに。化け物とか、お化けとかさ。でもあなたにとっては、そういうこともある、で済まされてたわけなんだ。なんかバカみたいね、私。
Her strained face returned to normal for a moment. It hit her There had been another way to handle this without anyone getting hurt. But the damage had already been done. There were no do-overs in life, nor should there be. Her own mistaken assumption had sent that situation spiraling out of control. But now that Soichiro was involved, she had to make sure that her secret was safe with him. Even if there had been another, better option, that ship had sailed. Human relationships were ultimately driven by mutual misunderstandings. Like tapestries woven from mismatched intentions. Break time was over. There stood Aoko Aosaki and Soichiro's Shizuki. Their first idle conversation they had since first meeting had come to an end. Not that they had a choice in the matter, it was the jarring murmuring from around the corner that cut it short.
Nemo meufnus memnit, veduroit extinct sest. Initio eraberamos dom brevimus dolores sunt. Nemo adiuvat.
Nobody remembers my funeral. My mourners have long since perished. We were born wrong, life is suffering, and somebody save me. Wie lang ist dieser Zauberspruch? The enemy was just around the corner, visible in the mirrors parallel to it.
悠長に話してる場合じゃないわね。とにかく今は距離を。
In contrast to Aoko's elegant blues, its light were a malicious red.
感動打ち。
Tosaka Saktai. There was a momentary flash of light before she even extended her arm. But the instant she saw the enemy, her dormant feeling erupted once more.
さっきから邪魔なのよ。
She channeled all of her pent-up anger and shunted it into her right arm. The fog that filled the corridor was no magical weaving, but rather a barrier of raw energy. It was equivalent to setting blaze to 3 buckets of gasoline to create a wall of fire, in the hope it would stop an arrow in flight. If the puppet had attacked with its arm, it could have pierced such a wall easily. But because it had loosed curses with no definite form, the wall of energy repelled the attack. While it was a huge waste of magical energy, it was the only means Aoko had to protect herself in that very moment. Unfortunately, its protection was reserved for Aoko alone. Wie gemein! Soichiro held his hand to his mouth. While the curse had been weakened to the point where Aoko could no longer feel it, it had plenty of effects on Soichiro, who was not a mage. As if to understood this fact, the puppet turned its gaze from Aoko to the unanticipated human behind her.
こいつは関係ないでしょ。
Ich meine, er muss sowieso sterben. Enraged, she swung her arm forward once again. The blue light formed a wall to block the gunner for a scent of the second. It was enough of an opening to exploit. Just as Aoko was forming the wall, the puppet pointed its right arm at her face and...
関係あるみたいだから逃げるぞ。
Before the rocket of death could be fired, Soichiro scooped her up into his arms. How he mustered the strength to do so was a mystery, but he turned his back on the puppet and took off running. He was a nimble sprinter, resembling a deer leaping across obstacles. Soichiro rounded 2 more corners, ignored whatever complaints Aoko was making, and eventually stopped in the middle of the 2nd floor. He sent her down.
よし、ここまで来れば少しは休めるな。
Sojiro's shoulders heaved as he caught his breath. As light as she was, running while carrying someone else would make anyone winded. She looked at him in incomprehension.
こんな体力あったのに、なんで？
It made no sense to her. If he had the stamina to pick her up and run, surely he could have stood up and escaped when he had been downed earlier.
ああ、あの時は諦めてたから。
His words were unfiltered as ever. Though in this moment, fighting for their lives, he lacked some of his usual absent-mindedness.
諦めてたって、どうして？
さあ、忘れた、そんなことは。
Though he may have turned away because he regretted saying it out loud. His words spoke volumes. For some reason, it pained Aoko to see him like that.
それより青崎、唐突に気分が悪いんだが、あの赤い光も、その…
ええ、魔術の類よ。ガンド打ちって言ってね。北欧の呪詛の一つ。魔術回路のある私には効かないけど、抵抗のないあなたには効果てきめんみたいね。
なんだ、青崎には効かないのか。じゃあ、危ないのはあの腕だけだな。
Aoko had no idea why he was relieved, but she gritted her teeth and fought down the urge to snap at him. There was no use in yelling at a time like this. Above all, she felt that it would have been pity in the extreme to voice her annoyance right now.
そうね。注意するのは伸ばしてくる腕だけ。大した相手じゃないわ、やっぱり。
This time it was not false bravado. Such an enemy would normally be a breeze for Aoko Aozaki. But her shameful negligence had led to the disruption of her magic circuits, making her even less formidable than her enemy. At this point, Aoko had no way of attacking. The only option left to her was to wait for it to expend all of its magical energy, but its perpetual curse mechanism made that a non-starter. This game of tag would not end until one of them was dead. She realized that she was in the same position she had cornered Soshiro earlier. She glanced at her right arm. She could not imagine how she had gotten into such a mess with her magical energy at more than half of its capacity. This had to be karma for having enjoyed toying with Sojiro earlier.
呆れた。いるところにはいるものね、神様って。
She grumbled under her breath as she shifted her focus. She had the fuel for the fire, but not the igniter. And that killing machine would chase her until the end of time, if need be. What she should do next was blindingly clear. She had to get back to normal.
青崎、
ごめん、考え事してた。確か…よし、合ってる。しずきくん、そこに横道あるのわかる？
あ？
Aoko pointed, but he could see nothing but the walls of the corridor. For one thing, the floor had nothing but left turns, and Aoko was pointing to the right.
2階は中心まで行くと1階に降りる階段があるんだけど、それは私が壊したから使えないの。けど、ここの作りも意地が悪くてね。よく見れば、右に曲がる通路もあるのよ。上級者だけにわかる抜け道ってやつ。あとは注意して探せば、1階の階段までショートカットできる。悪いけど、一人で行って。
Aoko turned her back to Sojiro and started walking. Walking in the opposite direction of the escape route and down the long corridor towards the puppet in pursuit.
あいつは無差別だから、ここで壊さないといけない。魔術師は魔術師同士で争うのはいいんだけど、 みだりに一般人に手を出しちゃいけないって決まりがあるの。あいつの目的は私のわけだし、結果がどうあれすっきりするでしょ。
If Aoko won, the puppet would be destroyed. If Aoko lost, its objective would be complete and it would shut down. Either way, them going their separate way would mean Soichiro survived. This is what Aoko meant, though she explained it as if the events were happening to two totally different people.
運が良ければ入り口までたどり着けるわ。それじゃあ、また明日ね。
Even Soichiro could tell she was just trying to act tough. But she had already disappeared around the corner by the time he thought to stop her. Mentally, Aoko bemoaned the disaster she was in. The quality of this puppet was on a completely different level compared to the one from the park 2 days ago. An auto-incanting perpetual motion machine was a rarity in and of itself, but this puppet was also equipped for battle with its extending arms and Gundam projection crystalline eyes. It was a first-class product that, if put on the market, would sell for hundreds of millions of yen. Although, that was only when factoring in its value as an antique. For the purposes of combat, it would have made more sense to mobilize a significant less expensive familiar. To use such a precious commodity as a tool for murder marked this puppet's master as a completely different breed of crazy from the enemies she had faced up until now. Ist der Magier die Frau, die da dauernd am Gewinnen war?
Vivo in som solitare putoresque inferis. Ictius mers obitus dies, et mers nativus dies. Theobeam.
来たわね。
A sound of crackling music box filled the air. The automata animated by its own curses approached. The corridor measured approximately 30 feet in length. Aoko lay in wait around a corner further down the hall, anticipating the puppet's appearances. This was not to buy Soichiro time to escape. Far from it. Aoko had concluded that she couldn't make a break for it under the current circumstances. Even if she did try to escape and by some miracle made it out of the House of Mirrors, that was as far as she would go. Outside, with no cover, Aoko would quickly be overtaken and skewered from behind. As long as her magecraft was disabled, escape was impossible. Instead, she chose to force the enemy back. Her situation was not the most favorable, but neither was the puppet's. Though this narrow hall gave Aoko no place to run, it in turn prevented the puppet from reaching full speed. That was the weak point of this machine. Automata of its era had a tendency to struggle with minute changes in speed.
セット。
She flowed energy into her shorted circuits. Her blood flow and magical energy supply were unstable. It would be difficult to construct a formula in this state. All she could do was harden her right arm by imbuing it with as much energy as she could. Doing so turned her arm into an improvised weapon like a hammer or bat. Assuming she could manage to get into close combat range, this was the best she could do. All she needed now was a plan of attack. The question wasn't what weapon to use, but how to use the weapon she had. The simplest way would be to use the mirror's reflections to hide and then rush the puppet from its blind spot. except for one major problem. It did not have a sense of sight in the first place. The puppet's view of the world around it did not stem from visual feedback, but from mapping the topography of its surroundings. In theory, it was the same as a bat's echolation. The environment could be measured based on the emission and return of high-frequency sound waves. Those chants served as sensor pulses. As far as the puppet was concerned, the mirrors were no better than transparent panes, making even the thought of an ambush laughable.
近づけば近づくほどよりリアルに察知される。本当は遠距離からの狙撃が最適なんだけど、ガンドを撃ってくるならフィンの一撃ぐらい隠してるわよね。
Gundor was Scandinavian in origin and, considering its simplicity, highly versatile. It was most effective at impairing a target's health by pointing a finger. As a single-action magecraft, it was limited to only causing illness. But there was a secret technique, said to be the greatest mastery of the Gundor shot. The Finn shot. It could do more than cause simple illness. It was a deadly curse that could stop the heart. The wound on her back set her nerves on fire. An unarmed girl and a deadly automaton. It was clear that she was the one destined for death. She considered her slim chances of survival when a vision sent chills down her spine. Quietly, using everything she could to clamp down on the feeling, Aoko faced her all too familiar illusion. She clenched her teeth to keep them from making a deafening clatter. But there, the sensation of fingers crawling up her neck. Behind her, the spectre stared and laughed. This alone made Aoko want to bolt. On top of it all, when Aoko tried to mentally simulate the coming fight, she estimated a 2 in 10 chance of dying in the first 5 seconds. 20%. At times her predictions were harsher than reality. If Aoko fought the puppet 10 times, she would die twice. She could not stop herself from visualizing her own corpse. She imagined herself collapsing, crumping under the puppet's curse. Her eyeballs swollen like a blowfish, blood and other fluids oozing from every bodily orifice. 1 in 5, 1 in 5, 1 in 5. A 1 in 10 chance of death was bad enough, but 1 in 5? It drove her crazy. Aoko forced down her heart as it tried to escape from her mouth. Taking in a deep breath, she peered at her own reflection. She thought back to that white night half a year ago. This, she decided, was nothing compared to that. 6 months ago, at the Coentre estate, the Hound of White Roses, the Wonder Snatch, that appeared from within the thick fog, had killed Aoko 100 times out of 10.
Me anima immortalis, otem me aftura necata sunt. Manes sum, animam definira ambiguum est.
A dark curse shattered Aoko's daydream. It was only 30 feet away. The puppet rounded the corner. Either side stood in the shadows, their form indistinct. The puppet gave no warning. Without preamble, it swiftly fired a Gundor barrage. Just as Aoko planned, the curses fizzled out as they hit her mist-like barrier of magical energy. The protection would only last a few seconds, giving her just enough time to... Hier kommt der Arm. Its stretchable spear sprang towards Aoko's face.
ビンゴ
The lethal weapon grazed her cheek. All her experience analyzing puppet attack patterns gave her the wherewithal to await the attack by a hair's breadth. It was one thing if a puppeteer were pulling the strings, but autonomous dolls had their limitations. Aoko had bet everything on this killing machine following a predefined template. The puppet would use a given attack for a given range, and she could adjust her tactics to that.
いけるこのまま
Before its arm had a chance to fully retract, she charged the puppet. It was a risky gamble, but her overall chance was slim to begin with. The scale tipped in her favor. If her predictions were correct, there were two ways she would die. One was from a fin shot fired at that range. And the other was if the puppet's attack pattern was beyond her ability to foresee. Oh, was gerade passiert? Instantaneous mass transfer, otherwise known as mass displacement. Immediately after Aoko dodged the puppet's arm, something smashed into her abdomen. The head-on collision from its shoulder felt like a rocket. But where had the ability to propel itself come from? Puppets like this were not built to have the ability to jet around like that. Der Arm steckt irgendwo fest. Doing everything in her power to stay conscious in spite of the pain, Aoko couldn't just make out what had happened.
推進力じゃなくて牽引力
Yes, the puppet's arm had not returned to its body. It was lodged in the wall and reeled itself in from the other direction.
そんなのありか
Swallowing her surprise, she hastily pulled herself back up. Her abdomen, specifically her diaphragm, had been dealt a significant blow. The attack left her disoriented. Thankfully, the puppet was surprisingly lightweight. Her bones and organs were intact and she had sustained no life-threatening damage. She was having a hard time breathing, however. She was shaking. Though she managed to keep her calm. In other words, in another 2 seconds, she'd be back on her feet. No, that was 2 seconds too long. She told herself to calm. Already calm. She'd only briefly lost her bearings. She was fine. She could recover her breath and her vision later if only her body would move.
Intellectus non necessaris est, quisque escat. Nostro sentiabulat fit. Ratio fix tantum est. Dolores nicium cerebrum fit.
Above her, Aoko could hear the warped noise of a powerful force.
足動けでもどっちに行けば
Schlag einfach zu! She could once more feel the touch of death.
Es salvati, es salvati, es salvati.
Grant us salvation, grant us salvation, grant us salvation. The puppet was so close that Aoko could reach out and touch it. That also meant that it could reach out and kill Aoko.
こいつの右腕の死角に入れる
By intuition alone, Aoko rolled over the puppet's right flank. Its arm was still embedded within the wall. From here, it could not attack. She had made the right decision, and her dizziness faded.
Intellectus non necessaris est, quisque escat. Nostro sentiabulat fit. Ratio fix tantum est. Dolores nicium cerebrum fit.
Cast off righteousness, lay piety to rest. We beasts are meant to consume each other. Life is but a decoration. Throw away your intellect. Pain powers the mind. Aoko pulled herself back up. It was her turn. It was only an instant. Within this labyrinth of mirrors, she saw an image of herself.
E salvati.
We die. A blinding, brilliant light flashed. Lacerations appeared across the walls. At the last moment, Aoko managed to thicken the magical energy running through her veins into a primitive form of magecraft resistance. It just barely saved her life from what must have been the puppet's ace in the hole. The puppet bore a striking resemblance to Aoko. This powerful curse was not satisfied with stopping Aoko's heart, but destroying her entire being. Aoko did not even have the time to be shocked. This was her chance for a counterattack. The puppet's balance was unsteady, its right arm still embedded in the wall. Aoko prepared to give its defenseless body a strong kick, but her knees buckled and she collapsed into a heap on the floor.
Vevo insomni, solitare putris cuniferis. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus natibus dies, Theobeam.
In slumber I live, in dirt I rot alone. Today is the day I died and was born, I come to you. A sudden nausea and lightheadedness overcame Aoko. Her body temperature began to rapidly lower.
こいつ呪いをばらまいてるんだった。
She noticed too late. The puppet's curse circled the hall. The curse chant that the puppet used as a source of power doubled as a defense mechanism, crippling those who drew near with illness. She bore the full brunt the entire time she was in close proximity to it. Although Aoko had magic circuits, she was succumbing just as Sojiro had. Languidly, she forced her deteriorating body to jump back.
負けるか。
For all the energy she could muster, she forced her way past the exhaustion caused by the curse. However, Aoko's blood pressure took a steep nosedive, not from the curse-inducing anemia, but from what appeared in front of her. They stood in perfect harmony. In front of Aoko was the automata that shared her face, its left arm held out like an arrow. The deadly weapon shot forward and honed in on her heart. Then, a moment before it made contact,
危ない。
the moment she heard that fearless voice completely out of place in this storm of violence, Aoko's body was pulled forcefully to one side. Once again, the extending arm cut through empty air. While Puppet quickly retracted its left arm, Sojiro took the brief opportunity to take Aoko by the hand and flee at full speed. Sojiro ran through the corridor as fast as he could, only stopping when he had put enough distance between them and the puppet.
その考えてみると
Though he had saved her, she looked angry rather than grateful. This did not keep Sojiro from saying his piece.
明日はどうも忙しいみたいなんだ。
In other words, let's finish this today. A rather awkward proposal. Aoko remained silent. She was also rather angry. Not that she could not figure out what made him tick. Not because he'd returned after escaping. Not even because he was spouting his typical airheaded lines. It was, she supposed, that instant. The fact that when he grabbed her hand, her mind had gone completely blank. Aoko found it unforgivable. Which beckoned the response.
あなた、正気？
Yep. In the heat of the moment, she blurted it before she could stop herself.
それとも自殺願望でもあったわけ？私もあいつも、あんたなんか殺す対象に過ぎないのよ。少なくとも、恩を売る相手じゃない。言っとくけど、私、助けられたぐらいで曲がる信念は持ち合わせていないから。
Sojiro nodded, clearly unperturbed.
青崎がそんな可愛らしいもんじゃないのはこの夜だけで骨身に染みてるよ。
She found herself slightly offended.
けど君は勘違いをしてるから少し正そう。あいつの狙いは青崎だけじゃない。君だけじゃなく俺も殺す気だと思う。
Wieso? She was having none of it. Her eyes shot daggers his way.
話は最後まで聞く。どうしてかっていうと、1階の入り口あるだろ、あの細長い通路。なんでかあそこから先に進めないんだ。逃げたくても逃げ出せなくて、仕方なく戻ってきた。
Aoko's eyes widened ever so slightly in amazement. Not out of shock, but rather admiration that her enemy would go to such length.
それに、さっきので完全に敵扱いされた。あの人形、こっちをじろっと睨んできたし。いや、一瞬でよく見えなかったけど、生きた心地しなかったな。青崎も気をつけた方がいい。多分よっぽど怖い顔をしているに違いないぞ、あれ。
Sieht aus wie Aoko.
それはご親切にどうも。
うん。なんでこれはもう他人事じゃないんだ。青崎と人形。結論として、どっちが勝っても俺は殺されてしまうんじゃないか？
そうね。そこまでやってるなら、目撃者は消すでしょうね。私みたいに。
だろう。でも、俺はあいつには殺されたくない。
え？
Oh, wie süß. His words were decisive. As Aoko looked up at him, she could swear he was trying to encourage her. It was then that she realized. Sojiro was looking even worse than before.
ちょっと待って。大丈夫なの？あなた。
まあ、醤油を一升瓶飲むよりはマシではないかと。
Ugh. He tried to make light of the situation, but his forehead was clearly drenched in sweat.
そうか。さっき人形に近づいたから。
How could he possibly be able to withstand a curse that made even Aoko nauseous? She bit her lip, annoyed at herself for not noticing this earlier. Sojiro was such an airhead that she hadn't even paused to consider his plight.
下で隠れていようとか思わなかったの？その方がどう考えても安全でしょ？
She really could not understand him at all.
それは青崎が言うセリフじゃないな。でもまあ、長話をしている時間もない。そろそろ追いついてくる頃だ。
He turned to look down the corridor. Oh, ich kann die Spieluhr schon hören. The crackling sounds of a music box could be heard creeping forth from the darkness.
さっき一回似て考えたんだ。君がやられても俺は殺される。なら、まず奴をどうにかするべきだ。
あなた、何が言いたいの？
She asked a question to which she already knew the answer. She did it to put him to the test. If he wavered even a little, she would have killed him where he stood.
提案。あいつをやっつけるのに協力したら、俺のことは見逃してくれる？
助けられたぐらいじゃ信念は曲げないって言ったでしょ。それに、あなたに何ができるっていうの？
それは青崎が考えてくれ。得意だろ、そういうの。
The commander, who had the overall picture, was responsible for delegating roles to their teammates. It was futile to depend on someone who was unable to grasp the situation or evaluate the enemy's strength. Sojiro was proud to share that he knew this. He spoke the truth. Aoko was the only one who knew both Sojiro and the automata. That was why he pointed out that following her orders to the best of his ability was the only thing he could do. It may have seemed as though
じゃあ、私の指示に 100% 従うってこと？
ああ。それに、これは恩とか義理の話じゃない。一人だと分が悪いから二人でかかるだけだ。善意でも好意でもない。取引って言わないか、こういうの。
まったく。労働と報酬ってわけね。それなら理にかなってる。うん。言いたくないけど。それ、結構私の好みよ。結構きついかもね。あなたの役目。